Welcome to Mixie Veteran Stories, where untold sacrifices, forgotten salutes, and silent heroes finally get the spotlight they deserve. Today's story begins at a funeral. An old man sits alone, unnoticed at the back of the crowd. No one knows who he is. No one even speaks to him. But when 47 Marines suddenly march in from the mist, they don't head for the casket. They stop right in front of him and salute. Who is this man? Why was he forgotten at his own son's funeral? And what secret bond between father and son could move a military unit to break protocol in total silence? Stay with us until the end, because what happens in the final moments will stay in your heart long after the screen fades to black. If you believe every quiet sacrifice deserves to be remembered, please like, subscribe, and share this story, and help us honor the unseen heroes, one story at a time. The sky above Arlington National Cemetery was still gray with morning fog when the chairs were set in quiet rows, facing a casket draped in the American flag. A few distant cars pulled into the lot. Engines cut. Heels clicked on pavement. Most came in silence, clutching tissues, avoiding eye contact. No one noticed the old man already seated in the back row, alone, as if he'd been there long before anyone else arrived. His name was Raymond Walker, 79 years old, a retired gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. But no one called him Gunny anymore. He had no family left, no friends nearby, and no introductions were made. At this funeral, the spotlight was on someone else, his only son, Captain Aaron Walker, who had been killed during a rescue mission overseas. Raymond wore his old dress blues, the fabric faded but immaculate. His medals had long since dulled, but they were pinned precisely over his heart. On his lap, his gloved hands clutched a small, worn photograph. Aaron at age 9, in a cardboard costume made to look like a Marine. They had taken it during Halloween after Aaron insisted on dressing just like Dad. As guests arrived, they passed by Raymond without a second glance. Some assumed he was cemetery staff. Others thought he was a distant relative from out of town. The funeral coordinator asked him to move twice, thinking he'd sat in the wrong section, but Raymond politely declined without lifting his eyes from the flag-draped casket. There was a subtle but unmistakable sense of distance. The attendees, military officers, family friends, government personnel, milled near the front rows. Conversations in hushed tones swirled around promotions, deployments, even politics. Raymond stayed silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because this moment wasn't about words. It was about presence. He had once led men into battle. He had written final letters for fallen comrades and delivered folded flags to weeping widows. He had survived the kind of days that leave their marks not on the skin, but in the spaces between breaths. But today, in this crowd, he was invisible. Still, he had come, not for recognition, not for honor, but for love. As the honor guard adjusted their stance by the casket, Raymond's mind drifted. not to the speeches that were about to be made or the flag that would soon be folded with perfect corners, but to the day his son made the choice he'd tried to prevent. Aaron wasn't supposed to be a soldier. Raymond had raised him to be strong, kind, and self-reliant, but he never wanted his son to follow his exact path. "There's nothing glorious about war, Aaron," he had told him one evening, staring into a cup of cold coffee. "It doesn't make you a man. Coming home makes you a man." But Aaron had already made up his mind. He had always idolized his father, polishing Raymond's boots as a child, memorizing Marine slogans, even writing school essays about the quiet hero he lived with. When he got his acceptance letter to officer candidate school, he left it on the kitchen table with a sticky note. "Time to make you proud, Dad." Raymond never said the words he should have. He nodded, gave a firm handshake, and said, "Do your duty." What he meant to say was, "Be safe. Come back. I can't lose you too." Years passed, and phone calls grew shorter. Aaron deployed 4 times. Raymond kept every letter, reread every email, and watched every news broadcast with silent dread. His son was out there somewhere doing what Raymond once did, but now with even more at stake. Then came the day that changed everything. The phone rang just after sunrise. A flat, unfamiliar voice asked if he was next of kin. Raymond didn't remember hanging up. He only remembered the silence that followed, how the house, always quiet, now felt suffocating. No knock at the door. No officer in dress blues. Just absence. Raymond wasn't listed in the official contact documents. He'd been left off accidentally, or maybe intentionally, after the years of emotional distance. It was Aaron's fiancée, Rachel, who called a week later, trembling through sobs, and said, "I thought someone already told you. I'm so sorry. He talked about you all the time." The funeral arrangements went on without him. He wasn't asked to speak. He wasn't invited to the planning meetings. There were no slideshows of their family trips, no mention of the man who taught Aaron how to salute, how to tie a tie, how to load a rifle without flinching. Yet Raymond showed up, quietly, on time, in uniform, because even if the world had forgotten the father, he hadn't forgotten the son. He sat in the back, not out of shame or bitterness, but because he didn't want to disturb the picture they had painted of Aaron, a decorated officer, a brave leader, a man who died saving others. But Raymond knew another Aaron, too. The boy who cried when his dog died. The teen who spent 3 nights fixing an old radio just to hear his dad's voice during a deployment. The young man who whispered, "Will I ever be half the Marine you were?" Now there would be no more questions, no more chances to answer, and above all else, no more time. Raymond pressed the photo tighter in his hand. It was the only thing left that hadn't been taken by war. He had come to say goodbye, but he would never get to say it out loud. The final prayer had ended. The chaplain closed his Bible, his voice echoing gently over the rows of mourners, then faded into the hush that always follows the last Amen. 2 members of the honor guard stepped forward. With mechanical precision, they began folding the flag over Aaron's casket, each crease deliberate, each motion practiced with sacred care. Raymond sat still, his spine straight, eyes locked on the flag, his breathing barely visible. When the last fold was tucked and the triangle secured, the senior Marine, stern, young, unfamiliar, took the flag in his gloved hands. He turned toward the front row, scanning for Aaron's fiancée. Raymond's fingers clenched slightly. He wasn't expecting anything, but the ritual made his chest tighten. Then came a sound, subtle at first. Boots, heavy, even, marching in sync. They were not the boots of the honor guard. These were slower, more deliberate, and they were growing louder. The heads of the mourners began to turn. From the far edge of the cemetery near the eastern gate, a line was approaching. A single column of Marines, 20 wide, stretched back deep into the mist. And they kept coming. Their dress blues were crisp. Their medals gleamed against dark fabric. Some were young, some were older, but they all wore the same solemn expression. No one smiled. No one spoke. Only the steady rhythm of their boots announced their presence. Raymond turned his head, slowly, like he wasn't sure if what he was seeing was real. He rose to his feet, instinctively standing at attention. The Marines reached the edge of the funeral assembly and began forming two parallel lines leading directly to where Raymond stood. 23 on one side, 24 on the other, 47 in total. And then they saluted. Every single one of them, in perfect unison, hands to brows, eyes fixed not on the casket, but on the old man who stood in their path. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The chaplain paused mid-motion. Aaron's fiancée dropped her bouquet. The lead Marine, a woman in her 30s with a captain's bars on her collar and tears threatening the edges of her composure, stepped forward. She carried a second folded flag in her hands. Without a word, she approached Raymond. "Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Walker," she said, voice low but clear. "Your son spoke of you often. He said everything he knew about duty. He learned from you." Raymond opened his mouth, but no sound came. "He called you the quiet hero behind the uniform," she continued. "He told us you were the kind of Marine who didn't chase medals, but men followed anyway. When we lost him, we knew we had to honor the man who shaped him." She held out the flag with both hands. "For you, Gunny." Raymond took it slowly, his hands trembling as he cradled the folded cloth against his chest. His lips moved, trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. A tear slipped past his left eye and disappeared into the crease of his weathered face. Then, without command, the 47 Marines snapped their heels, turned, and stood in complete silence. It was not a silence of absence. It was a silence full of recognition, of reverence. For 30 full seconds, no one moved. No camera phones were raised. No words were spoken. The cemetery had never felt so still, yet so full. And then, as if on an invisible cue, the formation pivoted. One by one, They exited in the same quiet discipline with which they'd arrived, leaving behind only the echo of their boots and a crowd that would never forget what they'd witnessed. Raymond didn't sit down again. He didn't need to, because for the first time that morning, he wasn't just a forgotten figure at the edge of a funeral. He was seen, and he was saluted. The cemetery emptied slowly. People who had only planned to stay for the ceremony now lingered in quiet conversation, their eyes still drifting toward where the Marines had stood. No one really knew what to say. Something had shifted. The usual rituals of grief had been broken, replaced by something heavier, something sacred. Raymond remained rooted in place, the second folded flag pressed tightly to his chest. A few mourners approached him, some with tears, others with trembling hands, but none tried to speak. Most simply placed a hand on his shoulder or gave a respectful nod. He returned each gesture with quiet dignity, still too overwhelmed to find his voice. Rachel, Aaron's fiancée, was the first to kneel before him. Her eyes were red, makeup blurred, hands unsteady. "I didn't know they were coming," she whispered. "But he would have been so proud." Raymond nodded. "He was always braver than me," he finally said, his voice cracking. That was all. No long speeches. Just truth. By the next morning, someone had uploaded a video, shaky, handheld, but unmistakably powerful. The footage captured the moment when the 47 Marines approached, when they saluted in unison, and when the captain presented the flag to the stunned, tearful old man. It spread fast. Within hours, the video had been shared across veteran forums, then picked up by local news, then major outlets. Headlines varied. Marine son honored in silence. A salute to the forgotten father. 47 boots, one hero. But the message was always the same. Not all heroes are in the spotlight, and some salutes come decades late. Messages flooded the comment sections. From strangers. "I never knew my dad either. Thank you for showing up for your son." From other veterans. "Semper Fi, Gunny, we see you." From young Marines. "He reminds me of my grandfather. I wish I had told him thank you before he passed." The Department of Defense issued a rare public statement, calling the moment an extraordinary display of Marine Corps brotherhood and intergenerational honor. Veteran organizations reached out with offers, support, interviews, even a feature in the Marine Corps Times. But Raymond declined them all. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't chasing headlines. He had spent most of his life moving quietly through the world, and he intended to keep it that way. Still, something inside him had changed. He no longer felt invisible, and the neighborhood seemed to change with him. The barista at the corner cafe began calling him Sir. A group of local high schoolers asked to interview him for their Memorial Day project. One morning, a young Marine recruit rang his doorbell and said, "I don't know what to say, but I just wanted to shake your hand." Raymond smiled. "That's enough." In his living room now sat two folded flags, one for the son he raised, one for the bond he thought the world had forgotten. He didn't hang them on the wall. He didn't put them behind glass. He kept them on the kitchen table, side by side, because for the first time in years, Raymond wasn't just remembering someone. He was being remembered too. A week passed, then 2. The headlines moved on. The footage stopped trending. But in a quiet house on the edge of town, Raymond Walker still rose each morning at 0600, just like he always had. He still brewed black coffee, still folded the newspaper in perfect quarters, and still placed 2 cups on the kitchen table, one for himself, one for a son who would never return. Except now, there were 2 flags beside them. He didn't speak to them. He didn't cry. He just sat, present, aware. Something had settled in him. Not peace exactly, but a kind of quiet belonging. One morning, near the end of fall, Raymond visited the cemetery again. The air was cold. Leaves whispered across the stones. He walked without a cane, his back straight, his shoes polished. In his hands he carried only the old photograph, Aaron in his makeshift Marine costume, and a small metal pin, the same one Aaron had worn on his final mission. He knelt beside the gravestone and placed the photo against the base. "I never said goodbye properly," he murmured. "I never told you how proud I was." A long pause. "I didn't know if I belonged there, at your funeral, but they made sure I did. Your brothers, your sisters, they saw me." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees around him. Raymond stood and gave one final salute, not as a veteran, but as a father. He didn't need speeches. He didn't need medals. He had received something more sacred, silence that honored him, not as a ghost of the past, but as part of his son's legacy. As he walked away, he didn't look back. He didn't have to.